Hi, and welcome back to Boss Wife. I'm your host, Ebony. Here is where you will get your motivation for the week. Here is where you will get the tools and tips to learn how to play, laugh, and live hard, unapologetically. Here is where you will learn how to erase the lines of the box because you realize you cannot be contained. Here is where you will learn how to show up for yourself. Here is where the most powerful transition will begin in your life. Welcome to Boss Wife. Hey guys, welcome back. So excited. So tonight I have another guest for you guys. His name is Danny Ozment, and I am overjoyed to even have this conversation with him because Danny is someone I listen to and get inspired from about podcasting. This is what he does. This is who he is. It's in his blood, in his body. You know, this is just what he is made of, is podcasting. So tonight we're definitely going to learn a lot about him. If you guys have been interested in podcasting, thinking about starting your own podcast, or even, just enjoying podcasting, like this guy is the guy who is going to help us realize what it is, what it's for, how we can use it, how it can help us in different areas, right? So let me tell you a little bit about Danny. He is a business strategist and a podcast consultant for busy professionals and solopreneurs. His goal is to help you clarify your message and publish engaging content that creates customers who trust you before they buy and can't wait to tell the world about you. He is the host of a highly rated podcast strategies for growing your business community and influence. He has spoken at a industry leading events, or many of them, including Podcast Movement and Mediavine. So guys, I hope you are really interested and really ready to hear what he has to say tonight. Just go ahead, make sure everything is quiet in the house. You know the drill. Put the kids to bed, the husband to sleep. Make sure the dogs and the cats are put up. Make sure you have no interruptions, no distractions, because tonight we have a lot to learn about. We have a lot to engage into, and I'm excited to even share this with you guys. You know me. I love sharing everything with you guys. I miss you guys. I love talking to you. So let's go ahead and welcome Danny onto the show. Okay. Right in. So how was your day today?
It's been good so far. I live down here in Florida, so
wow.
The weather's always pretty nice, and it's been a little bit threatening, like it's gonna rain today, but no, it's been nice.
Okay, good. I see you have drums in the back. My son is a musician. Are the drums the only instrument you play?
I play the drums. I actually have a master's degree in conducting.
Oh my goodness!
So I was a singer and have 6 years of college in the music world. And before I was a podcast producer, I ran recording studios for musicians and worked with a lot of musicians. But musicians are frustrating, and they're not as business minded as most podcasters. So podcasting is definitely a lot easier to run a business.
I'm sure. I'm sure. That's amazing. Wow. That's awesome. My son would love to hear that.
Yeah. You can have a career in music. It's a little harder to have a career in music, which is why I diversified and started doing other things, like with recording, to be able to work in music, but then also hit other things that needed recording services.
Gotcha. So tell us how you got into podcasting.
Well, I think like a lot of my colleagues that do this, I was listening to podcasts. I was working with musicians, working in the music world, and wanted to learn things. They in some studies we've seen that like 74% of podcast listeners listen to podcasts to learn new things. So that's what I was doing. And I was learning new things, and people were helping me change my life by listening to their podcast. But I started to notice that several of the podcasters that I listened to just really didn't have great sounding podcasts. So I would reach out to them and say, hey, I'm a recording engineer. Please let me help you. Because your podcast sounds horrible. You're changing my life, but it sounds horrible. Let me help you. So I started doing it for free, just on the side. And then people wanted to pay me, and then people wanted me to do more, to work on their shows. Like, hey, could you write our show notes too? Or could you create this? Or could you create some social media graphics? And I was like, sure, sure. And it just kind of grew into a business from there.
Wow. So you do a lot. You don't just do podcasting, like you can do everything.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. I currently have an agency where we have right now 30 podcast clients that release shows every week, and pretty much all of our clients, all they do is record their show, and we do everything else. So we're producing their shows, editing, mixing, mastering. We are writing copy, whether that's show notes or blog posts to go with their podcast, or sending out emails to their list, or scheduling social media stuff for them, helping them promote their show. We even have some clients where we create the content for them. So, like, I would call you, Ebony, once a month and interview you, and then create a podcast from that where I'm the host and you're the co-host, but it's your brand or whatever. So we do a lot of different things like that.
Cool. That's pretty cool. Okay. So, how do we? So once we get started doing our podcast, well, tell us why we should do a podcast, especially like if we're a business owner, or if we want to do it for personal reasons. Like I didn't do it for my business. I started doing it for personal reasons because I wanted to get my voice out there, and I wanted to be inspirational to other people who might have been going through the same things I was going through. So, like, why is it important, or why is it a great thing to do?
Well, if anybody's listening to this podcast, they actually already know why, and I'm just going to tell them that, but they already know that this is the reason. Since humans were in caves, like running from predators and just learning how to make a fire and things like that, we've communicated by talking to each other, right? And sharing stories. Even before we were painting things and writing things down, we were passing along stories, we were communicating by speaking to one another. And that's what's happening with a podcast. This effect when you're listening to your favorite podcast, and it's a half hour long, and you listen every week, you start to see that person that you're listening to as your friend, right? Mm-hmm. And you build a relationship with the host. Oh, like, I know this person, I know lots about this person, this is my trusted friend that shows up every week on Tuesday nights, or every other week on Tuesday nights. And you build that relationship with them. And for a business or someone who has an expertise in something, it transfers into that, where the people listening to you trust you. Right. They trust that you're an expert. You are an expert in their eyes. If you can talk for 30 minutes a week about a certain topic and help people, then you're an expert to them and they trust you. That's why most people should get into podcasting, because most business owners, most anyone that's trying to build a community, so you don't have to actually just have a business. It can be community that you're building, an audience that you're building, a business that you're building. You need to connect with people. And especially for businesses, a lot of business, I know, like, a lot of my 30 clients, they are people that were referred to me by someone who was already a client or a friend or someone who knew me already and trusted me. For a business, a podcast can become this sort of referral marketing on a grand scale, because you're talking to 100 people at a time, 1,000 people at a time, 5,000 people at a time. And all of them think of you as a friend.
Right.
They trust you. And if you say to them, hey, you should check this thing out, or you should come buy this, or you should download my ebook to learn how to do this, they will do that, because they trust you, because they've heard you say something that has helped them and had them stick around week after week after week. So for most people, that's it. It's that podcasting, more so than even a YouTube channel or blog, it's a way to connect to an audience in a deeper, more meaningful way that builds a trusting relationship over time.
Okay, that's awesome. You're right. And that's one of the biggest points I try to drive home, especially when I'm doing my podcast. Is that I'm here for you. I'm ready to talk to you guys. If you have questions, talk to me back. Leave comments. Yeah, I definitely love building that community, and that's definitely what it's for. And like you said, you don't just have to have a business to do it. It's all in
Right.
your motives behind it. I love it. So tell us, how do we, or explain to us, because this is one of my biggest things right now that I'm trying to fiddle through, is monetizing my
Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah. Well, and before I jump into that, like I like that you talked about how a podcast is a great place for you to engage with your audience,
Mm-hmm.
have a back and forth. A lot of podcasters tell me, they feel weird because they're just talking to a microphone by themselves, or if they're doing an interview, they're talking to one person. But your listeners who are listening to us right now, they can participate, right? They
Right.
can comment, like you said. And I tell podcasters all the time that that's something they should actively participate in, because if you start a podcast, it's this wonderful place where you can think you have a vision for it and a goal, and then you start to ask your listeners, hey, if you could spend 15 minutes with me, what would you ask me? And you get people responding, and then you start to find out, well, hey, maybe my audience is actually this, and you can shift and you can pivot. That's the wonderful thing about the podcast.
I love that.
And you ask about monetizing, and hands down, this is the number one question I get from podcasters all the time, because I think a lot of people get into podcasting and they think, oh, I've heard this podcast and that podcast that had sponsorship from HelloFresh and Native Deodorant and Athletic Greens and MeUndies and like all these different sponsors that they hear. So they think, okay, podcasting, I can get into it and I can make money. And that's where I sit people down and have some real talk right away.
Right.
And say, okay, look, for most podcasters, you're never going to get to that point.
Right.
You're never going to get to the point where MeUndies is going to give you $1,000 a month to do a 30-second ad read, or $5,000 a month. Most podcasters are never going to get there, because the average podcaster gets about 120 downloads per episode. That's the average.
Mm-hmm.
If you get over 1,000 downloads per episode, you're in the top 30%.
Wow.
If you get more than 2,000 downloads per episode, you're in the top 20%. If you get more than 5,000 downloads per episode, you're in the top 10% of all podcasts. But it's not really until you get to the top 5%. So 10,000 downloads an episode, 100,000 downloads an episode, before you will actually see real large amounts of money from advertisers. So I talk to a lot of podcasters about, okay, so be real from the beginning. Podcasts don't go viral. They don't blow up.
They don't.
They are a long-term investment where you're building this audience that's your core audience, that trusts you, that has that relationship with you. So the best thing for most podcasters is to think about sponsoring themselves. So that can be any number of things. That can be if you are helping people and you're teaching people. Maybe that is a small group where people pay $100 a month or $500 a month to have a weekly call with you and this group, and it's group coaching. Some people call it mastermind, where you get together and you talk with each other and you help each other out. You could have workshops where you do a day-long thing or a half-day thing, whether it's virtual or hopefully soon in person. You could have books that you sell. Like, you can actually turn your podcast into a book by transcribing it and having a ghostwriter help you turn it into a book.
Wow.
Or you can write it yourself. Or you could have an ebook that you sell. Or you could have a free ebook that then has a $25 workbook that people can use as they're going through the ebook. And that's a way to sell it. Make money. You have courses. You have all sorts of things, consultations, coaching sessions. I work with a lot of podcasters who are coaches, business coaches, life coaches, whatever. And a lot of what they will do on their podcast is actually bring people on and do live coaching sessions on their podcast, so that other people can see what it's like to work with them.
Okay.
And that's the type of thing that most podcasters need to think about when they're thinking about monetizing. That, there's other things. If you're doing a podcast where it's not for your business, but you're building a community, or it's a true crime podcast, narrative podcast, you're creating art, or you're entertaining people, there are platforms like Patreon where you can create a membership site basically around your podcast where people can support you. They can maybe get benefits from that support, whether it's like exclusive access to you through a monthly call, or any number of things that you can add as benefits. You can have your own membership site, but there's all sorts of ways. If you can't, so I'm in that boat where I have, in the thousands of downloads per month, and I would never get, Athletic Greens to pay me lots of money to read an ad once a week for them. But what I can do is I have my products, I have my services, I have my membership site. But then I also say, okay, what products do I use? What services do I use that I would recommend to my clients or people that might be listening to my show? So I have like a web hosting service where I'm an affiliate for them. So I can say, hey, use this, use WPX hosting, and use this link, DannyOzment.com/WPX, to get, to sign up or whatever. And when they sign up, I get $70 for everyone that signs up.
Cool.
Or ConvertKit, I get I think it's 20% of every time someone signs up for ConvertKit, I get 20% of every monthly payment that they make. So you can make money that way as an affiliate advertiser. It's not thousands of dollars, but hey, if 10 people sign up a month for the hosting service I mentioned, that's $700
right
a month they send me. So that's great. That covers my electric bill. That covers like these types of things.
Right.
So there's all sorts of ways that you can monetize, but you really have to pick what is the best way for your audience. And I kind of shot down advertising right away, but there are people, like I have a client, actually a person who's a member of my membership site, and they talk to nonprofit organizations about grant writing. Now there are only like 2 or 3 grant writing podcasts in active grant writing podcasts, and she has 2 or 3 different products or service providers that specifically talk to nonprofits in the fundraising space that want to sponsor her show, because they know that the 1,000 people a week that listen to her show are exactly the people they want to be talking to.
Right.
And they're willing to do $500 a month for a 60-second ad in each episode. And there you go. Like, all she has to do is record that ad once, and it plays before her show each time. And she was able to get an advertiser. So that is possible, especially if you can pick advertisers that really connect with your specific audience.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That was a lot. Like, I felt like I should have been sitting here like taking notes the whole time.
Well, luckily with a podcast you can play it back. So.
Exactly. That's the best thing about it. So yeah, that was awesome though. Like, I didn't know that was a lot of great tips. So in my venture of podcasting, I've started, life coaching. I do confidence coaching. So some of my listeners, are my clients, and for them, like you said, this is an additional to what I already do, what I already talk to them about. For people who want to do this, for my listeners who want to do this just for personal reasons, and like you said, they're not interested in monetizing. Like, what are the other benefits of podcasting?
What are the other benefits? Really, the best way is to go back to what I was saying earlier. The reason to podcast, if you're not monetizing, is one of the better ways to grow a community, to grow an audience, to grow some type of following. You might be and everyone has to, if they're trying to build a community, you have to be everywhere. You kind of, you might have, you want to have a YouTube channel, you want to have a blog, you want to have a podcast, you want to be on social media, you want to be in all these different places. So let's say you've built up a pretty large Instagram following, and you also have a YouTube channel that has 1,000 subscribers or 500 subscribers or something like that. Those are channels where people are, I guess I would use the term superficial. Okay, so your Instagram followers are probably not, like, if you have 1,000 Instagram followers and you said, hey, Instagram followers, buy my course, or come here, or whatever, join me in this call, we're going to do this special call, you might get 5% of those people, 2%. Same thing with YouTube. Like, if you are putting out 10-minute videos every week, you might get people watching a minute or 2 minutes of those videos. Your podcast audience, though, is going to be, let's say you have 120 people listening each week. Well, those 120 people, and this is, they've done studies on this, and Edison Research puts out a study each year where they track this. 93% of podcast listeners listen to more than half or all of every episode. So if you did 30 minutes a week with your 120 people, 93% of those 120 are spending at least 15 minutes with you, if not 30, the whole thing. So those 120 people, while that's less than your 1,000 Instagram and less than your 500 YouTube, they are the people that really trust you. And so if you say, hey, we're going to go do this, or I'd like you guys to sign up for this, or I'd like you to support this person that we had on the show last week, or whatever your motivation for doing a podcast, your podcast audience is going to be the people that trust you and actually do the things you ask or recommend. And so for a lot of people, even if you don't want to make money off it, if you really want to reach people, if you really want to teach people, the podcast audience is going to be the ones that actually follow through. They're like your inner circle, your core audience. So that, to me, can be the motivation for a lot of people, is that if you want an audience, if you want a community, if you want to build some type of community, whether that's to, like in the sense of being a community organizer and building something, or building a business, or whatever, that audience is going to be the one that is the most motivated and the most loyal.
Okay. And that was actually going to be my next question, was how do we go about building that audience?
How do you go about building it? With a podcast, there are two main ways to do it. So first off, because everybody thinks, like, you can, in social media you want to promote it, you want to do all of your normal marketing things,
right? But
with a podcast audience, the easiest way to grow your audience is to borrow other audiences. So doing what we're doing, I'm going on your podcast, I'm talking about what I do and what I'm an expert at,
right?
That that is the best way to then say, like, if I wanted to say to you, hey, we're talking about this topic, your listeners that are here with us today should go back and check out episode 82 of my podcast, because I go more in depth into this subject. I can't even remember what I talked about on 82, but I would say something like that. And then those people who are already listening to us right now in their Apple Podcast app or the Spotify app or whatever, they can click search and type my name in and find episode 82 and start listening and building a relationship.
Yeah.
So doing that, going and saying, hey, I'm an expert in this, let me look at Apple's top 200 of podcasts that are in my similar industry or my similar category. And each week I'm going to send a pitch to 10 of those podcasts. And I'm going to say, hey, I was listening to your podcast. I heard on episode whatever that you were talking about this, and I really liked how you pointed out this, and this. I'm an expert in that as well. I think I could, go deeper into this subject that you didn't cover. Would you be interested in having me on your podcast? And because I appreciate that you talked about this subject so much, here's a review that I wrote for your podcast. I send them a screenshot, like all that sort of stuff. And if you did that 10 people a week, Maybe you get one or two a month that are in the top 200, and they have larger audiences than you. And so when you say, hey, check out my podcast, you bring people back.
Right.
That's the best way. But then you always have to look at your current audience. And that's why you hear every episode, most podcasters will say, please rate and review this podcast. Share it with someone you think it would help, whether that's a family, a friend, a colleague. You do that because your loyal audience is more likely the person that's going to actually share that. And then you grow that audience organically. I have one client right now that started her podcast 5 years ago. She wanted to reach a larger audience. She's a therapist. Wanted to reach a larger audience to help them do, improve more than just the audience she had, which was her clients, basically at the time, her patients. So she wanted to help a larger audience, and she started from nothing. 5 years later, she gets hundreds of thousands of downloads a month because her audience has continuously said, hey, my friend that also has this issue that I have, check out this, because she continuously said, please share this with people that could use my help or would be helped by this. So organically, you can grow that way. By borrowing audiences, you grow much faster. And then again, you still have to promote it on social media, tell your social media following about it, send out emails to your email list. And if you don't have an email list, I guarantee you know 10 or 20 people that you could email and say, hey, I'm creating a podcast about this. Would you be interested in following me, or would you be interested in hearing more about it? And then that's your start of an email list. And then you can do other things, like have downloads that people can download off your website, and to get the download they have to enter their email address. It's called lead magnet. But if you're helping them with the download, you're helping them learn something, and the exchange is just give me your email address, and then you have people that you can communicate with directly using email.
Right. Okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah. When I started listening to different podcasts like you, I started out listening to them first before I started actual podcasting, and man, I got lost. Like, I got so lost because, like I said, I was like taking notes. I was trying to do this and I was trying to do that, and I was investigating how people got started and what led to this. And when I got to the funnels and the leads, and I was just like, okay, like that's definitely not for me. I was like, that's definitely for an expert, because it was just over my head. Like, because I have so much going on in my life, and to add just that part of it was just like just too much for me. So I was like, yeah, we'll put that off until next year. But in doing podcasting, like I said, I listened to everybody and did a lot of different ways, and I took a lot of notes. And one thing that I learned was it doesn't have to be perfect. You just got to start, right? So I have like this, like I said, this is my confidence thing. Like, I love building people's confidence. I love inspiring them and being, helping them to be great. How do we narrow down that niche? Or, like, is it important to have like a certain niche? Can you have like more than one niche when you're podcasting? Like, can you explain that to us? Like, how does that help our audience as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because that's something that comes up for a lot of people. If you read articles, or you start to search about podcasting, should I be podcasting? What's up with podcasting? Like, all that sort of stuff. You'll start to see numbers where people say, oh, there's 2.4 million podcasts out there. And yes, technically there are 2.4 million podcasts out there. So people are like, well, I searched, and there's 15 shows about what I wanted to talk about. Yeah, there's a podcast about everything. But what they don't realize, and this is why, like, being in the industry and being connected with industry leaders, like some of the folks that work for Libsyn, which is one of the bigger podcast media hosts, they start to share statistics with you where they say like, well, yeah, there's 2.4 million podcasts, but right now, in the last 90 days, only 322,000 of them have released an episode.
Wow.
So there's only 322,000 active podcasts right now. And at this point, that's actually one of the lowest numbers in a long time. But listener numbers and download numbers have not decreased, and they keep going up. So right now, if you're thinking about podcasting, it's actually one of the best times to get in, because podcast listeners, we talked about this before we even started recording, they want someone who's going to show up every week,
Right.
or every other week consistently. They want a friend. They want someone who's going to be there for them. And if you release 4 episodes and then disappear, or like all the people that started using Anchor when it came out, 1 episode and then nothing else. That's the reason we have 2.4 million, by the way. It's all Anchor's fault, really. Because there's millions of dead podcasts that nobody has added to or never even released an episode, but they have like a 10-second something that registers as an episode.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an audience there for a small number of podcasts right now. So you start to talk about what you know, what you want to talk about, what you're passionate about. And if you can get as focused as possible, that's really helpful. If you can niche down to the point where you can only find 1 or 2 other podcasts that are similar to that, that's a good idea. Mostly because in the podcast world, the way people find a podcast is through a web search, first of all. So the title of your podcast, the description for your podcast, it's all search engine optimization stuff. If people are searching for a topic that is near to what you're talking about or what your title is for your podcast, they will find you and they'll start listening to you, because Google also prioritizes podcast content, especially because they have their own platform now. So videos, images, and podcast episodes get ranked and show up on the page. Well, ads show up first, but then videos, images, and podcast episodes show up before blog posts, before websites, things like that, before articles, all that sort of stuff. So you do that, you optimize your title, you optimize your description, you optimize your episode titles, and then people can find you. Because even in the podcast search engines, like Apple's podcast app search engine, if your keywords or the keywords that you talk about are not in your title, people won't be able to find you. Because I've seen slides in presentations where they show how this stuff is weighted. Like the title is huge, the show title is huge, and then it's the actual host's name is the second thing that Apple searches for. And then it's like episode titles and other content below that, very small. So you have to nail your title if you want people to find you in those actual podcast apps.
Okay.
So that's how you're going to get found, and that's why it's really important to try and get as focused as you can in that niche. Find what you really feel comfortable speaking about and what you want to do, and find, like, if you're helping people be confident, having, knowing then that, well, it's not just people, it's like we've talked about this earlier, it's women. And then, okay, is it women of color, or is it all women, or is it women of color of a certain age in a certain area? Like, you can get down into geographic region.
Wow.
And find that if you're doing the confidence show for, because I lived in the DC area for a while, for the DMV, which is DC, Maryland, and Virginia, then you might find an audience that's looking for someone who is local, that's doing workshops locally or something like that. I talk to a lot of lawyers and real estate professionals who have podcasts, and I tell them all the time, hey, don't talk about personal injury on your podcast. Don't do a real estate show that's all about the market in Sarasota, Florida. Talk about the area that you live in. So I have lawyers that basically do shows about their area where they talk to this new restaurant owner this owner of a new restaurant that opened up, and they talk to the chef and they interview them, and then they interview the principal of the high school, and they talk about the mechanic that they have used for 10 years, and they become like a digital tour guide or a digital mayor for their area, because then they get people listening to them in their area, which is where they need clients from if they're a lawyer or if they're a real estate agent.
Right.
And then when anybody needs a lawyer, they're like, oh yeah, I listened to that podcast about this area with that lawyer. Let me approach them because they were nice and I trust them. That's how it works.
Gotcha. That's pretty cool. Like, this is overwhelming. Like, this is awesome. I'm glad I have this and I can go back and listen to it. But yeah, that's pretty cool. So, yeah, that makes a lot of sense though. You know, I mean, it's just like in anything. Like when we go get a degree or anything, you know, you want to make sure that you have that key spectrum that you're only, you know, focusing on. As far as, you know, any tips or suggestions that you may have, like, you know, how can we continue to be great in what we do as far as podcasting, I guess?
Well, yeah, I mean, in anything, you actually sort of mentioned it earlier, just offhand. I tell people to just get started. Start ugly is what I actually say. Like, you've got to start, because if you wait until you've perfected an idea or a concept of something you want to do, or a podcast you want to start, it's going to be too late.
Right.
Or you'll never get started. My cat is playing back there. Yeah, you've got to start ugly. You've got to get started, because that is how people will see you. Right. That is how you will find out if this audience that you found really wants to talk about this idea, or whether they'd like to learn something else.
Right.
So start ugly. Done is better than perfect in this world today. Like,
True.
You know, you don't want it to be crappy, you don't want it to be sloppy, but you got to get it out there.
Right.
Because then people can give you feedback, then people can engage with you. And I think that's the most important thing that I've learned in my journey from, you know, 20 years ago getting a degree in music to having a business now that supports my family, was that I just had to start things. I couldn't be, I'm an Enneagram type 3, so I'm kind of a control freak and a perfectionist. And so I had to resist that a lot, to wait until I got it perfect, because of those things that I waited to get perfect, by the time I got them ready to go, it was too late. It was just like, well, just let's abandon that, because that's no longer relevant anymore.
Wow. Okay. And then, like, what advice do you have on, you know, not giving up too soon? Because I when I was going through my recovery before I went back to work and all this other stuff, in my personal life, you know, of course, things kind of weigh down on you, and, you know, a lot of things take place, because that's life, right? We have a lot of things that interfere with everything, and I never had a point where I wanted to give up, but when I had to go and start doing it like every other week, you know, I kind of got overwhelmed, because I was like, oh my God, I have a lot on my plate, but I wanted to stay faithful. I wanted to stay, you know, true to what I said I was going to do. So, like, how do you not give up on, you know, anything, period, I guess?
Well, and it's especially important in podcasting. I mean, there's actually a term in the industry called pod fade, because most podcasters don't make it past like 10 to 15 episodes. It's too hard, it's too much work, I can't stay consistent with it. And consistency is important, because again, these are your friends that you're talking to, your listeners are your friends, and if you ghosted your friend, how are they going to feel?
Right.
They're going to feel like you've let them down. So, you know, in terms of practical things, other than just being like, knowing that these are your friends and you've got to be there for them once you start up, even if that means showing up, so let me give you some practical ideas. A lot of podcasters get this done by picking 1 or 2 days a month where they can block off a half a day, 3-4 hours, whatever, and record a few episodes or record a few interviews. I have one client that records 1 day a month and does like 6 interviews in a day. I can't do that because I would be exhausted. But that's, you know, someone who wants to do that.
Right.
And when you do that, when you batch those things, you can get a bunch done at once if that works for you. Or if you can't do that, you know, pick a day each week where this is I'm going to record. I'm going to record 2, or I'm going to record an interview and a solo show every week. That's a way to keep going and keep consistent. And honestly, I tell people too, even if you can't do that, or you get to a week where you're like, oh crap, I don't have anything for this week.
Mm-hmm.
If you recorded a 2-minute episode, a 3-minute episode that said to your listeners, hey guys, I'm sorry, I don't have anything to talk about this week. I ran out of time, but I just wanted to say hi. I wanted to check in and, let you guys know that I'm here for you. If you have any questions, here's how to reach me, et cetera, et cetera. If you just do that, the 1 week where you're like, oh my gosh, I can't get anything done, people will appreciate that so much because you took the time just to show up.
Wow. Awesome.
Yeah. So that's a practical way to really keep going, is either batching or finding a way to block out time each week, or just show up. Just show up for a few minutes. Don't do that all the time, because then people will be like, wow, this is not a show anymore.
Right.
But just showing up can really help and keep that relationship going.
Awesome. Okay. That was great. I love that. Just show up. And you can apply that in a lot of different ways in your life. Just show up. Okay. Well, Danny, thank you so much. This has been awesome. I love learning. I'm always learning something new. So I know my listeners definitely learned something tonight. We've definitely grown together tonight. So this is awesome. Can you let everybody know where we can find you, where they can get in contact with you, if they want to even, look into having you as the person who's over their podcast, because that's awesome. Like, I definitely am probably going to look into doing that myself, but letting people know, how they can get in touch with you.
Well, definitely. I mean, the easiest way, first off, if you want to listen to my podcast, it's called Podcast Strategies. You can find it by just searching my name in any podcast search engine, any podcast app. If you are interested in starting a podcast, probably the easiest way to get started is to get my podcast roadmap, and you can get that by going to my site, dannyosment.com/roadmap. That is a nice 25-item checklist where if you do all those 25 things, you'll have a podcast. You'll be able to launch a podcast. I do have a membership site where I have a course, and I have a community where we have question and answer calls and a discussion forum and all that type of stuff, called the Podcaster Pod. People can access that by going to dannyosment.com/pod. And you can find me on all the social media at Danny Ozment, basically. I'm really active on LinkedIn, really active on Instagram, and I'd love to connect there. Feel free to send me a DM or whatever you want to do.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Danny. I really enjoyed this, like I said, and I can't wait to catch back up with you, sometime, whenever in the near future and see what else is going on. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Ebony. I had lots of fun.
Wow, you guys. So I've learned a lot. I know you guys have. I wanted to do something different tonight because we talk a lot about, our needs, our wants, our desires, our goals, our dreams, and I wanted to kind of slow things back, scale things back, and just kind of give you guys an idea of why I do what I do, how I do what I do, and everything that goes into podcasting, because it's not just me sitting down at my computer and hitting a button, because I have equipment, I have mics, I have lights, I have backdrops or whatever. There is a lot that goes into, finding my guests on my show. There's a lot that goes into everything that I do. So I just kind of wanted to scale back and kind of show you guys the behind the scenes of things. And if you were wondering how to get started with podcasting, and how you should go about doing what you do and the purpose behind it. Like he talked about, the community in which I'm even trying to build. I want to build a community alone, not just, get my confidence coaching out there. Like I want to build a community. I want people to reach back out and talk to me as well. I want to be able to help people. So there's a purpose behind what I do, and there's a purpose behind my podcast. And he also talked about niching down, and in everything we do, we know that we have to focus. We know that we have to maintain a stability on all common grounds. Okay, so yes, we always want to start anything we do with a niche. Make sure that you are purposely doing everything that you're doing on purpose. He also talked about monetizing. He also talked about showing up. What? We talk about that all the time. Show up for yourself. Also show up for other people. It's important to always be there. It's important to always keep your word and say, if I do this, this is what I'm going to do. You can hold me to it. Because guess what? At the end of the day, you are what you say. say. So we want to make sure that our name means something. It carries a weight. Okay. He also talked about the let me slow this word down, the statistics of podcasting. I got it right, y'all. Okay, so he also talked about that. I'm not gonna repeat it. He also talked about that. And I was actually kind of blown away. I've already heard it because I listened to his podcast, like I said. I've already heard about it, but I was blown away on how many people start something and don't finish it, or how many people start things and don't carry it out. I'm not gonna say I'm gonna be doing this within the next 20 years, but hopefully this will grow into something bigger, and it will always be a part of what I'm doing. You know, like I don't see myself blogging, but I never saw myself podcasting. So, you know, and like you said, you know, this can be a book. I was like, what? This could be a book. Like, you know, it's just a lot of things that are gate openers, you know, like they're door openers, they're gateways for you. So yeah, I'm going to put all of this in the notes as well. As you see, I've been doing a lot of things. I've been adding a lot of things. Like I've been growing. I've been, you know, expounding and experiencing and just getting better. And that is, you know, what we're all about. That's what this podcast is all about, is being better in anything that you put your hands to do. We always want to do great things. The other point that I really do want to point out before I end, you guys, is getting it done. Doing it is better than perfection. We will be professional planners. We do not want to do that with our lives. Don't be professional planners. Do something great. Be something great. Expound and just grow. You know, like show your kids that there's more to life getting up, going to school every day. There's more to life getting up, going to work every day, because there is. You know, do what you want to do. Be great. There is so much more in this life and there's so much more to us that we have to offer, and tap into it. That's all I got to say. I love you guys, and this has been another great night. I'm so excited because I just feel like, you know, everything is coming together, everything is growing, everything is definitely going forward. That's what we want to do. We want to move forward. Like, share, comment. As always, I am here for you guys wherever you are. I am there on any platform, anything that you listen to music to, watch videos on, I am there. I love you guys. Make sure you like, share, comment, and subscribe. I will see you guys next Tuesday.